All right, we are finishing our study in Numbers this morning. So it's a little windy, so Adam and I have 4 clothespins holding my notes, so this will be interesting. Hey, I'd like you to turn to Numbers chapter 4. If you're a guest with us today, we would love for you to stay afterwards for our picnic, our meal together and fellowship. So want to encourage you to do that. And so that's for everybody that's here. Even if you didn't bring anything, it's all right. We usually have more than enough, so would love for you to join us in that. We are in Numbers chapter 4 this morning, and when you read through this chapter, believe it or not, your eyes might glaze over a little bit, only because it's just an explanation about some jobs that some people are given to do in ancient Israel. And so I want you to ask you to follow along on your outline that was in the bulletin. And let me just ask, I'll begin. You don't have to call out the answer, but have you ever done something, you've really put your whole heart into it. You did what you thought God wanted you to do. And when it was all said and done, you asked yourself, I wonder if it made a difference in anybody's life. I wonder if you've ever done that. Have you ever thought that? I have. You pour your life into something or into people and you wonder, am I making a difference? And I think sometimes if we're not careful, and I do this, what I've discovered is that what God is looking at is our faithfulness. Are we being faithful to what He's called us to do as individuals, as a church, as ministries, whatever it is? We have to guard against what I like to call the comparison game, because I've gotten into this too. This comparing ourselves, whether it's our church or what we're doing with somebody else, and maybe we think, well, we're not as, quote, successful as they are because of the standards maybe someone has set up for success. I think we need to be careful to guard against that in our own lives. Pastors, we do this. Pastors do this. I used to go to meetings and, this was years and years ago when I was a youth pastor, and I remember going with Pastor Dave Broom down in Arizona to these pastor meetings, and they weren't all this way, but occasionally you'd get the guy who'd start talking. We had a pretty good sized church, but these guys would start talking about what they were doing, and it was almost like they were trying to outdo each other. And we just can't go down that road. Let's face it, there are people that are much more well known than you or I, the Billy Grahams of the world, the Chuck Swindols, but none of those individuals would tell you that it's because necessarily they're more spiritual, more gifted, that they're smarter. They've had an opportunity that God put before them. But you and I have opportunities that God puts before us that they don't have. The people that we work with, the people that we are neighbors with. We just have to be careful to remember that everyone sitting here has something to offer to God, and that we can't get caught up in comparing. And I'll be honest, sometimes you don't see the results that you hoped for. You won't. But you know what? What God has called you and I to do is to be faithful, to do our part, but that God is sovereign. God is the grower. And we always have to remember that. And I'd like you to look with me at Numbers chapter 4. If you were a member of the tribe of Kohath, or of the tribe of Levi, but the family line of Kohath, you were relatives to Aaron. Well, Aaron's lineage gets to be the priest, right? They're the priest. But this other branch of the Levite tribe, their job may seem mundane when you read about it. And I want to walk us through just a few things in this chapter. Then I'm going to make some observations. I'll have you look at a few other scriptures with me. But Numbers chapter 4, okay? Now let's just read. You can follow along. I'm reading the first 4 verses to start, all right? The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Take a census of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, by their clans and their fathers' houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old, all who can come on duty to do the work in the tent of meeting." If you went on and read the next 10 verses, God gives an explanation of the jobs that people are to do when it comes to the sanctuary in the wilderness. In other words, every time Israel got ready to move, they had to tear down the meeting place of God. And Aaron and his descendants specifically were the ones that were to go in, take down the altar, take down the ark, do all of these things and cover them. And you know what the job was for this line of Levi, the Kohath? You know what they were supposed to do? You know, this is really exciting. They got to carry all the stuff in the tabernacle, or a good portion of it. That was their job. Once it got all put down and taken down and covered and set by Aaron and his family, then the Kohathites came along, and their job was to carry all the stuff to the next place when Israel would camp and set up again. Doesn't that sound exciting? I can tell you that there was one person of this tribe, of this lineage, this branch of the Levites, that wasn't happy. We looked at him earlier in our series. It was Korah. Remember Korah in chapter 16? He didn't like that Moses and Aaron were in this position of leadership, and he thought he and others should be priests just like Moses and Aaron, and they complained. Well, he was part of this group, the Kohathites, but that just wasn't good enough for him. So when you read through Numbers, you have to keep in mind, just like with anything, that whatever you and I are called to do, it is important. Never think that the ministry you're doing for God doesn't matter. This isn't about, which gift is more upfront than others. The gift of mercy, the gift of compassion, those gifts are just as important, the gift of serving, as is the gift of teaching. No spiritual gift, no talents, no abilities that God gives us, one is not necessarily more important than another. So I wanted to share with you 4 thoughts this morning. When you read through Numbers, you'll think, how in the world did you come up with this? Well, I got, I just did. But there's just 4 things that when I read Numbers 4, and then I look at other scriptures, and we're going to do that too, that remind me of what we are called to do. And the first thing to keep in mind when it comes to serving the Lord, it's right there in your notes, we've just said it, but every act of serving is important to the Lord. The Kohathites could have complained. They could have thought, you know what, of all the jobs you could give us to do, you got us carrying a bunch of stuff from the temple. You know what? Hang on here. Hang on. Okay. Forget the notes. I've read this thing so many times, but I ain't got it down. I'm in trouble. But I want us just to think about this. When you go through Numbers 4, the one thing you see is there's no unimportant parts that these people are given to do. Whatever you and I are called to do is important. I want you to keep your finger here, and I want us to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. All right? 1 Corinthians chapter 12, very familiar passage. 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, Romans chapter 12, Ephesians 4, 1 Peter 4, all talk about spiritual gifts. These are abilities given to us by God's Holy Spirit when we become a Christian. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul is dealing with a group of Christians who in some cases have tried to exalt certain gifts over other gifts. And Paul is very, very clear in this chapter that every gift, every serving that somebody does, no matter what it is important. Look at verse number 4 of 1 Corinthians 12. There are varieties of gifts, but the same Holy Spirit. There are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone. Now look at verse number 11. He's talking, then he goes on in verses 7 through 10, and he gives a list of some spiritual gifts. But then in verse 11, he says, all these are empowered by one and the same Spirit who apportions, that's the English Standard, distributes or gives to each one individually as he wills. Every Christian, doesn't matter our age, is given at least one spiritual gift by God. And there is some thought that over time, our gifts may change. That maybe for us to do something else that the Lord's laying on our heart, He gives us a different spiritual gift so that we can do that ministry, that project, whatever it is He wants us to do. But the one thing that Paul says is that it is God's decision what gifts we get. And I have known Christians over the years that have complained about their spiritual gifts. I don't get it. Because we have what we have because God has given us the gifts He has. I'm called and you're called to use them for His glory. Our gifts may change, but our call to serve never does, ever. But I want us to keep in mind that every act of serving the Lord is important, and don't compare to what somebody else is doing. We need to do what God calls us to do and says to us, this is what I want you to do. When He laid it out for the Kohathites, if you don't think it was important what they were doing, let me read to you verse 15 of Numbers 4. This is what God said in Numbers 4, verse 15, about this job of carrying the stuff of the tabernacle. It says in verse 15, and when Aaron and his sons have finished covering, these are the words of the Lord, when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp sets out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these, but they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. That's pretty heavy stuff. He goes on to say, these are the things of the tent of meeting that the sons of Kohath are to carry. At least they were told what they were supposed to carry. The point of it is, and I just can't stress it enough, every act of serving the Lord is important. The Kohathites' job was just as important as some of the Levites' jobs, some of the other Levites' jobs. What you're doing for God is no less important than what somebody else is doing. There's a second thing that as I look at Numbers 4 and then as I think of the scriptures, and I do believe this, serving the Lord means doing our best. We're not talking about perfection because that'll never happen. But I think we need to do our best when we're serving the Lord. Some people, and I've been guilty of this, we get lazy in our gifts. We think, well, I'm too busy, I'm too this, I'm too that. We don't prepare, we don't do this, we don't do that. It's very easy. I get very busy during the week sometimes. I don't golf 6 days and show up just here on Sunday, on the seventh day. If you've ever golfed with me, you know that's not true. But when I show up on Sunday, my goal, because of the gift that I have of teaching, is to give you my best. There are times when you're done and you think, man, I just didn't didn't flow. It didn't go like I wanted it to. But we give our best, and we quit making excuses for when we don't do our best. You know, we're all busy, right? I don't believe you had to be at church 27 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whatever God's called you to do, my theory is do one thing, do it well. Whatever it is, just do it well, do it to the best of your abilities. And so that to me is a lesson that I learned. God's not going to strike us down if we don't do our best, but I think we owe it to Him to do our best. Numbers chapter 4, look at verses 15 through 20. All right? This is what he goes on to say. He continues discussing this whole deal about the moving of the sanctuary. And so he pinpoints another part of the tribe of Levi, the son of Aaron, named Eleazar. And he says, Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, and he lays out for him what he's supposed to do. He shall have charge of the oil for the light, the fragrant incense, the regular grain offering, and the anointing oil. And then it says this, Eleazar's job is he has oversight of the whole tabernacle. Everything that's in it. That's his job. Take care of that. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, and again, God is going to remind Aaron the importance of the Kohathites who carry all of the furniture of the tabernacle. In fact, he says in verse 17, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. Here's what he said. Let the tribe of the clans of the Kohathites, let not the tribe of the clans of the Kohathites be destroyed from among the Levites. You need them. They're important. But deal thus with them, and so they've given instructions, that they may live and not die when they come near to the most holy things. So he says to Aaron and Moses, you need to tell the Kohathites this. Aaron and his sons shall go in and appoint them each to his task and to his burden, but they shall not go in to look on the holy things, even for a moment, lest they die. It's all laid out for those guys. I just want to encourage us, just do our best. Don't overload yourself. Learn to say no. I can't do it. I can't do it. I've got enough. You have jobs, we have families, we got a lot going on. You can't do everything. But I think whatever God tells us to do, as he said to the Kohathites, do our best. Do what God just lays on your heart to do, whatever it is. And don't compare. Don't compare. There's a third thing. Flip over your notes. Look at this. The back is only half a sheet. When it comes to serving, the thing that has to be kept in mind is who we are serving. All of the parts of the tabernacle, all of the pieces, all of the furniture had to do with God and His holiness. Everything. Everything that was tied to the sacrifices and the offerings and everything was tied to the holiness of God and His personhood. So when it comes to serving, the reason I serve is because of what God has done for me and what God has done for us. And when you read through Numbers 4, and you can't help but notice that, the entire chapter is so focused on the stuff of the tabernacle that was to remind Israel of who God was, and He had led them out of Egypt, and He was a holy, perfect God. So I served, and you serve. Why? Because of who God is. When you read through the Old Testament and the New Testament, there is a reverence that you see when it comes to serving God. Why do we serve God? Do we serve God to get a pat on the back? What if no one ever said to you, good job, would you still serve? That'd be like me standing in the back of church every Sunday and I have a clicker in my pocket, and when somebody says good job, I click it. And at the end of the time, I see who said good job for the sermon, And then hopefully somebody doesn't go, you put me to sleep, but but I don't do what I do, and you don't do what you do to get an attaboy. The Kohathites could have compared their job to their relatives and said, well, those guys are the high priest. They're the priest. All we're doing is carrying the furniture. But why do you do what you do? Why do I do what I do? I do it because of the Lord. I do it because of what God's done. That's Numbers 4. It's the holiness of God seen in all of the parts of the tabernacle. That's why we serve. That's why we serve. And there's a fourth and final thing that I don't want us to miss either. So when I say this, I think it's very important that I explain what I mean. It's sometimes, I just got to be honest, I'm not a micromanager. I'm not. Well, I micromanage Emily, but you have to. Just kidding. Just kidding. But when you are serving and you look at Numbers 4, the one thing that jumps out is that there was accountability. In fact, Moses and Aaron had a very high degree of accountability before God as the leaders of the people. And when we serve, there is accountability. If you're doing a ministry, just do your ministry. No one's going to hover over you and say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? But we need to encourage each other because we've laid out a structure. Ministry teams and then ministries under those teams. But I'm not going to come, looking over everybody's shoulder. And many of you serve doing things that aren't even listed. But we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. And if we're doing something and we're part of something, do it. If I'm a Kohathite and I'm told, make sure that you do not look on the instruments of the tabernacle lest you die, that's accountability, right? This is what you're to do. It's laid out. Then boom, do it. But Moses and Aaron, they just do their job. They cover the furniture of the tabernacle. And the Kohathites are called over along with a few of the other, part of the family tree of the Levites. They all have parts to do. They all pick stuff up. But they're all accountable. And ultimately, it's true, we're accountable to God. We're also accountable to each other. We've talked about it before. We're not going to go into detail about it. But I want you to understand that and never think that what you do for God isn't important. And don't get into the comparison game. And don't think your ministry doesn't matter as much as this ministry over here. What God leads you to do is important. God says, be faithful. Study the church in Philadelphia in the book of Revelation. In many people's minds, they weren't a powerhouse church as we would think, but they were faithful. And it's one of only 2 churches of the 7 in Revelation that God found no fault with. And he said, I've put before you an open door. But it was God that would give the results. All he said, I put before you an open door that nobody can shut. Nobody. And as long as Oakridge is here, we have an open door. Serve where God leads you. And never think that what you do doesn't matter. Because it does. It does. And this is a serving church. It matters. That's it. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.
You can find more messages like this one at oakridgebc.org and like us on Facebook for encouragement and event updates right to your newsfeed. Thank you for listening to today's message from Oakridge Community Church.